Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of Pioneer Mindset. So I want to start off this episode with this quote. Unless you can change the mind, you won't change the results. All right, so really powerful one as we kind of get into things here. But really, that's ultimately, when we go about that phrase, that's ultimately the goal that I have. The goal that we have within Pioneer Mindset is to change the mind. So that way we can, in essence, change the results, right? That's what we're trying to do, is learn new things, think about things differently, and do things differently so we can change the results that we're actually getting. Where this actually stems from is here last week, as I'm recording this, we're talking about kind of mid-July, but last week, my wife and I actually went down to Springfield, Missouri, and I attended a cattle marketing school by Doug Ferguson, Mr. Cattlemaster. He teaches sell-by marketing, which is kind of a different strategy when it comes to the cattle marketing. The principles that we talk about in that class can apply to a lot of different things. And so as I was kind of pondering back on that school, kind of looking back at my notes and seeing the different things that I actually took away and really found value. And I thought, hey, this would be a good episode to kind of share with all of you guys and just to kind of give you my interpretation of a lot of things that we talked about. Now, full disclosure, I'm not going to get into a lot of the techniques when it comes to sell-by marketing. I'm going to touch on it briefly before we get started, but a lot of the class that we spent a lot of time on actually the mindset side of things and looking at your current paradigm and how can we flip that to get into a new paradigm. And then basically changing our mind so we can change the results that we are ultimately getting, right? That's what I talked about right at the beginning. As we went through the class, went through the course, it's a 2-day class. And I'd suppose probably at least the first half a day, we spent a lot on this mindset. And that's exactly where I like to spend a lot of my time too, because that's where it all starts. That's where it all stems from. The 6 inches between our ears. That's what we can really kind of control our thoughts, and those thoughts control our actions. So I'm going to kind of dive into that, but a brief overview as to what the sell-by marketing school entails and what it all consists of when it comes to that strategy. I'm not going to go into a lot of details here because I'm not the teacher here. I'm not the expert. Doug is. And so at the end, I'll kind of give you his information so you can kind of look him up and follow him along and learn from him directly. Because I don't want to also miscommunicate the message here and miscommunicate even the strategies here with sell-by marketing. But essentially, when it comes to sell-by marketing, and that phrase, when I first heard it number of years ago, and I've been wanting to go to this school for a long time, so I was glad I was able to actually take some time to go there. When I first heard it, the phrase sell-by marketing, to me, it comes through my mind as like you're going to sell by marketing. And so it's just kind of the play on words, but in essence, it's actually backwards from what we typically do. When for most of us in the cattle industry, when you're trying to maybe buy some calves, you're buying them and then you're going to sell them. And so you're buying them based on how much you think you can sell them for. So that's buy-sell marketing, where this is just kind of the opposite. It's sell-by marketing. So you're going to be selling something and then buying something back. And you try to actually make your money, make your profits, make your decisions, take your control, exercise your control, if you will, on that buyback. It's all based on kind of the relationships of different classes of cattle, different classes of livestock. Could be not necessarily even just cattle, or it could be cows. And even these techniques are being used in real estate even too. It's all about the relationships of two different things. Trying to sell something that's overvalued and then buy something back that's undervalued. That's really kind of all I'm really going to touch on right now when it comes to the techniques, because I cannot explain it near as good as what Doug can because he's the expert. But when we got into the school, talking a lot about the mindset side of things, which was really valuable as to, like I just mentioned before, hey, in order to change the results that we're getting, we need to first change the mindset. And then even furthermore, when it comes to this sell by marketing, because it is opposite of what we typically think about when it comes to, buy sell marketing, trying to buy the animal and then sell them for what I can get on the back end, right? It's opposite. And so we got to really change our mindset around this. We got to really change our current paradigm. All right. And so that's what we're going to dive into right away, is kind of our current paradigms and talking about paradigms, what they are and how they ultimately dictate how we think. Okay. So what is a paradigm? Paradigm is basically the lens that you see the world through, maybe your assumptions, your beliefs, your mental habits, even. And I'd say when it comes to paradigm, I think a lot about just even our worldview and even our self view. So the worldview is just, like I said, how you see things. And maybe everything that you've been through in the past, the way that you were even taught, trained, and conditioned, how you grew up, that's all going to shape your current paradigm and how you see that lens. The easiest way to maybe interpret this is just even like your glasses that you're wearing right now, whether it be sunglasses or your reading glasses, or just even looking out through like a frame, looking out. And so you've got all these things kind of on the outside that shape the frame, shape the way that you see things through, right? Your assumptions, your beliefs, your mental habits, those all kind of come from everything that you've been through in the past, everything that you've had to experience in the past, everything that you've learned, all the challenges you've had to face, the fortune that you've actually had. And then even furthermore, that is ultimately shaped, especially as young adults, that's ultimately shaped by our childhood and by those we grew up around. And so that might be your parents, that might be your grandparents, that might be your friends, your family, and that's all kind of shaped around that. And a lot of times our paradigms are made up of those around us anyways, or that were kind of passed down even from previous generations, right? When we talk about paradigms, I kind of equate this to when you talk about like a generational operation. Okay, I'm fifth generation on our operation. And so how many different paradigms have I had passed down to me just around farming and just around cattle and the livestock industry in general, right? And for those different sectors. So that's even when I think of like a first generation operation, I think there's a lot of opportunity for those that are first generation operators, because they don't have sometimes those paradigms that they have to break basically and get outside of. That's kind of what we have to work through sometimes, is in order to get new results, we got to change our thinking. So we got to have a new paradigm. And so before we can get to a new paradigm though, we have to ask ourselves, what's our current paradigm? So what's our current way of thinking? And how does that affect the results that we're actually getting? And is that limiting us? Is our current paradigm limiting us and limiting the results that we're trying to achieve? Side comment here, when it comes to paradigm, I actually go back to a different podcast. The Working Cows podcast is what it's called, by Clay Conry. I don't know the guy personally. I've listened to the podcast a lot over the years, but he talks a lot about paradigms and how we can shift that. And so I would definitely recommend giving that a listen. He talks a lot about shifting paradigms, and that's what we dove into. Like one of the first things was when we dove into the class was, how do we shift our current paradigm? And how do we acknowledge what our paradigm is actually getting us? Okay, so how do we adapt a new paradigm? And this all kind of goes back down to, so the next thought here is, well, it's thoughts. So when we think about the paradigm, it's basically just some of the different thoughts and beliefs and mental habits that we have that we don't even recognize typically. They're kind of our subconscious mind, if you will. And so how do we basically change our conscious mind? And so that way it will change our subconscious mind. It'll change our paradigm. It'll change our thoughts, will change our actions. I'm going to be saying that. I'm going to be repeating that a lot. You become what you think about. And then within that, most people actually wish positive but expect negative. When I kind of heard that phrase when it was brought up in the school, that one kind of really hit me, because I feel like that hit home for me. I will admit that I'm pretty guilty of this. Most people wish positive but expect negative. I used to kind of equate myself to a big dreamer with realistic goals. I'm a dreamer, but I'm also realistic. So yes, we're dreaming about big positive things. We're dreaming about having an awesome operation, running thousands of acres or running hundreds of cattle, and having all the things that we want in life, or at least all the materialistic things that we want, or we think we want. So we think positive. But then at the end of the day, our survival mechanism comes in, as human nature does, and we think negative about everything that could happen. And we're trying to protect ourselves. But at the end of the day, by protecting ourselves, we're going back to that existing paradigm that may not getting the results that we want. We're trying our best to wish positive or hope positive, but then expecting the negative results. And then we're surprised when we get negative results, because that's what we're expecting. And so there's a lot of things that a guy can dive into there. But at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, is our thoughts are going to be dictating our actions. And now I also want to pause and I want to go back to the paradigms because I had a thought that just popped up for me to bring this more personal back to even like our story and maybe share something that's even relevant for you is thinking about current paradigms that you've had in the past and how that ultimately dictated some of your actions, the results that you got. So, how can we bring this home for you? For me, as I was thinking about this and as I was going through the school, and they brought this up in one of the slides, was thinking about how most of the time the paradigm that we deal with as ranchers in this case, there's a lot of cattlemen in the room, cow calf guys in the room, very few row crops guys, but just stick with us, guys. If you're row crop specifically, just stick with us because a lot of these things can definitely apply to you as well. But for the cow calf guy, they were talking about how most of the time the paradigm is you can only be profitable 3 out of 10 years. Now, that may have changed recently. If you're in the cow calf industry, the last 5 years have been profitable. So we're already ahead of that, which is great. That's awesome. But typically before 2020, 2021, when the cattle market started to actually inflate, we had a pretty tough go. And I'd say the 3 out of 10 years is pretty realistic. And there might have been, another 3 years that was break even, and then another 3 or 4 years that you're probably actually losing money, right? So at the end of the day, you're probably, with that mindset, with that paradigm, you're really not gaining anything. And so with that mindset that the cow calf industry can only be profitable 3 out of 10 years. So I take that and I take that paradigm because that was kind of what I had. And so I take it back to our situation. So the paradigm that I had was shaped by, our experiences. My worldview was shaped by the experiences. Our story, as most of you know, I came back to the operation in 2016. We built a hoop building. We expanded our cow calf herd, but in doing so, took on a lot of debt, had a lot of financial challenges. So within those challenges, I equated a lot of those challenges to the cow calf industry, into the expansion that we did within the cow calf sector, I should say, and within the cow calf enterprise. And so I equated a lot of those financial hardships. Even furthermore than that, the death loss that we faced. We would grind day in and day out and bust our butts to do our best to keep calves alive and to make a good living, right? But at the end of the day, as I dove into the numbers and as I tried to take ownership of the operation itself and where we're at and where we're trying to go, the numbers just kind of kept presenting themselves that, hey, the cow calf cannot be profitable. Now, as we step back at that, I think about it from an outside perspective, kind of looking back at the past, I'm like, okay, were the numbers actually showing that? Or did I make the numbers show that? Did my mind perceive the operation as not being profitable because that's what I was telling myself? It was kind of an eye opener as I was listening to this. And it's something that I've maybe thought about in the past, but not this in depth. And as we're sitting into a marketing class where, we talked a lot of positivity and the different ways that a guy can do things, whether you have a stocker operation, cow calf operation, feeding operation, doesn't matter. There's a lot of opportunity in there. And that's what this class was all about. But anyways, back to the paradigm that I had was we are not going to be profitable with cow calf if we own the cows. And so we have to sell them. And a lot of times it's also when you're in that state of mind, when you've kind of made your mind up, but you're ultimately just trying to justify it, we will seek other opinions that kind of coincide with their justification. So what I mean by that is at the time, if I've had it in my mind that, okay, the numbers don't look like they're working for the cow calf sector of the business, we're not having a lot of fun, we're suffering financially, we shouldn't own cows. And all of a sudden I listen to a podcast where somebody else is an expert and they say, you shouldn't own cows and you're better off not owning cows. Well, boom, I got my justification right there. I got somebody to back it up. That's what we're going to do. We're going to make that decision. Well, a lot of times that paradigm might have just been based off of my worldview. And then it was backed up by somebody else's worldview that right or wrong. I mean, that's just kind of the reality of it, right? I bring that up because how often does that happen? Right now, okay, flipping it back to row crop for you guys that are listening, you want to make sure that this applies to you too, right? How many times are we hearing right now that the row crop industry cannot be profitable? Cannot be profitable. Okay, so you're telling yourself that, and yet you're trying to turn out a profit even though you're telling yourself it can't be profitable. Okay, so that goes back to those thoughts, right? You become what you think about. Okay, so most people think positive or wish positive but expect negative. How often are you doing that right now within your business? Whether it be row crops, whether it be cattle, and even the cattle side of things. Oh, it's super high, but when is it going to crash? When's it going to go down? And so that keeps us in a scarcity mindset, even though we're in really good prices, really good time frame. As I was thinking about this, it's almost kind of a light bulb moment. It's one of those where the light bulb was always there. It just never was quite turned on, or maybe it was just really dull. We always know these things, right? We hear them all the time. You hear them on somebody else's podcast, not just mine. You become what you think about. Paradigm shifts. We talk about all those stuff. Mumbo gumbo. Maybe you care about it, maybe you don't. But either way, I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the paradigm that we currently have, and is it getting us the results that we're looking for? Okay, and if it isn't, how do we shift that paradigm? How do we shift it so that way it does get us the results that we want? Back to the beginning phrase, unless you change the mind, you won't change the results. And that's where ultimately the feelings equate to thoughts and thoughts equate to actions. And so we're just trying to basically change that whole pattern, that whole paradigm that we currently have. So to kind of keep moving here to a couple other things that were brought up at the beginning of the class was even just the fact of about thinking about commitment. So switching gears to kind of commitment here. So once we've maybe committed to, I want to have different results, well, what does that look like? What does that look like? Well, it looks like trying to figure out what an irrevocable commitment is. So an irrevocable commitment is basically committing is deciding the price is worth paying for the goal to be achieved. And now it's a really powerful one, so I'm going to repeat it. Commitment is deciding the price is worth paying for the goal to be achieved. And that's what we're trying to do, is really commit to something that we're interested in and committing to achieving the results that we're after. On the same lines of commitment, I feel like a lot of times people are just very interested in things, but never fully committed. And I'm interested in a lot of things, but I actually commit to very few. I can admit to that myself. I can attest to that. I am interested in so many different things out there, especially in agriculture, whether it be business, whether it be farming, maybe it's regenerative farming, if we're going to throw out that word. Maybe it's cover crops, maybe it's equipment, fun changes on equipment, maybe it's using different fertilizers, foliar feeds. And back to the cattle side, maybe I'm interested in sell-by marketing. Maybe I'm interested in trying to utilize the resources that we have. Maybe I'm interested in trying to start a new business. Maybe I'm interested in doing trucking. Maybe I'm interested in all these things, but I'm actually committed to very few. And I think that's kind of coincides with back to the results that we're trying to get, is we're interested in all these things, but commit to very few. Things that we do actually commit to, and we decide that the commitment is worth paying the price for the goal that we're trying to achieve, that's when we actually start to get results. That's when we actually start to move the needle. That's when we actually start to shift that paradigm as well. So that kind of goes back to that paradigm. If I commit to a new paradigm, and if I actually commit to it, not just interested, not just saying in the head, well, I would like to have this paradigm, but I don't actually do anything about it. I don't actually commit to it. I don't actually pay the price that's needed to get that paradigm and adapt it. Where am I going to actually go? Nowhere. We're not going to get the results that we're truly looking for. We're not going to actually find success. We're not going to actually be able to obtain success. Talking about the commitment side of things, there was so much there that really hit home for me, because I think it's of a matter of just finding something you're committing to. A lot of times for me, going back to the having a multiple interest, but having a hard time committing to very few, or having a hard time committing to the ones that I think are necessary. A lot of times we don't know what we want to commit to because we're trying to find the best one, the best thing, the best idea, the thing that's going to take us the farthest, the easiest, and trying to commit to that. Well, at the end of the day, we don't know what that looks like. We don't know what that is. I think those that go the farthest are the ones that be able to commit to an idea, not the best, but they are committing to the idea that they're going to be able to achieve the best. That's where I think a lot of success can come from, is those that are willing to actually commit to that goal. And furthermore, within commitment, I think commitment and being intentional go hand in hand. Kind of back to the school, right? I went to the school here in July. I think it was about 4 years ago. I went to a regenerative farming school, for lack of better terms. You can use the word regenerative if you want. But anyways, it was a soil health school. I can't remember the name of the school right at the top of my head. But anyways, it was in July about 4 years ago. Went up to Minnesota to a school up there, and a really good school. But the one thing that I really remember taking away from that is just being intentional. Just being intentional. And being intentional is just like being committed, right? Committing to something and sticking to it, and be willing to pay the price to achieve the goal. So within achieving the goal and talking about success, the next point here that we kind of went to was the fear of success. The fear of success. And I always remember hearing that the first time, that phrase, the fear of success. And I thought that was bullshit. I just thought that was just made up. Like, how can that be true? How can somebody fear success? When success is everything that we're after in this life, how can somebody fear it? And then after I've tried to actually achieve success ourselves, yeah, it's definitely possible to be afraid of success. And once again, if you haven't noticed, these kind of all kind of follow, right? We talk about the paradigms, we talk about thoughts, the commitment, and now the fear of success. And these are all things that definitely keep us from actually getting what we want. So basically fear of success might be fearing the negative, the fearing what could happen. And once again, this is back to the survival mechanism. When we're trying to accomplish new things, when we're trying to reach new heights and strive for greater things, we've all of a sudden got this little voice that goes on in our head that's like, well, if I do this, then that's going to happen. And it's usually something negative. It's usually something that's going to affect us in a negative way. Well, if I actually make this money, well, if I'm going to be looked down differently from my peers or all those around me, or my parents are going to look at me different if I make these choices, or if I do this thing that's different, I'm going to be looked at and I don't like that, or I'm not going to be able to handle this when I reach this new limit. So I don't want that. And so it's just all this fear of fearing the negative that could happen with success. Furthermore, the line that I always come back to, and they said it in the class, but I've heard this multiple times before, and I'm sure you have as well, but this all equates to new levels, new devils. All right. So if you haven't heard that before, new levels, new devils basically means as we go to the next level, there's always going to be new devils that talk to us in our head and that are going to try to hammer us down and keep us from staying on that level, or at least keep us from going even further. And so new levels, new devils is one of those things that I'm sure if you've climbed for new things, if you've strived for different things, if you've gone further in life than what you have before and reached those new levels, you've definitely gotten there. I'll kind of take this back to our personal story, right? As we've started Pioneer Mindset, as we started the podcast and Pioneer Farmer and the coaching consulting business, I can definitely equate to that because, we're putting ourselves out there and we're doing our best to accomplish new levels, right? Getting to where we have clients and we're helping them, going from where we have nobody to somebody. Yeah, that's a new level. And all of a sudden there's new devils that comes with that, new challenges, new mountains that we have to climb. And so I think one would be very ignorant or naive to think that there won't be new devils or challenges to face at that next level. Once we climb the mountain, we think, okay, we're good to go, right? We're going to have everything figured out. Same thing, even like in farming. I laugh because my dad brings up all the time, obviously he's a generation ahead of me and he's been through a lot, seen a lot, definitely had his shares of new levels and being able to accomplish things. And he always says, well, as I get older, you would think it'd get easier. And that's not always the case because as we accomplish more things, as we reach new levels, there's always going to be something else that we're faced with, always going to be a new challenge that we're faced with. And that paradigm is going to shift as we move as well. Maybe it's that paradigm that we need to change. Okay, so maybe we change the paradigm and that new paradigm allows us to get to the next level. Well, at that point, we need to adapt again because we're going to be faced with new challenges. This life is never easy, by the way. If you haven't figured that out, if you haven't adapted that mindset, well, by golly, this life is just not very easy. So we need to make sure that we're adapting that mindset of new levels, new devils, because as we accept that too, by the way, I feel like as one accepts that, new levels, new devils, that gets us into a resilient mindset that, hey, we're aware that as I keep pushing, as I feel this resistance, as I push through the resistance and get to the other side, it's not just going to be smooth sailing. Yes, we're going to accomplish new things. We're going to accomplish things that are worth paying the price for. And we're actually going to achieve the goals. But there's always going to be something else there. If you know that and if you fully accept that, then you're going to be able to accomplish the things. And as they come your way, go through them with a resilient mindset. I had that episode a while back talking about kind of the abundance mindset and even being a problem solver. And if you're a problem solver and if you're in the business of solving problems, then that's what you're doing. You're just facing those things as they come your way. Very profound thing there to acknowledge that, as we get into new levels, we're going to have new devils, and that's okay. That's just part of it. And so now as we shift this from mindset to the basics of business, right? This is where the mindset meets the checkbook and we can shift back to the basics of business. And so some of the things that we talked about that are still on the mindset side, but can really equate to the business. And that was what I really liked about the class is, yes, we were talking about a marketing school about cattle, mostly about cattle. Could be equate to a lot of other things, but we're talking about business. A lot of these other things that we talked about go back to business, whether you're row crop business, cattle business, seed business, trucking business, construction business, maybe you've got a retail business, doesn't matter. It can equate to a lot of these things. So we discussed some overall just principles. Now they were kind of principles of either the sell by marketing tactics, but even just principles in general for business. So I'm not going to mention all of them, but a few that really were pretty good take homes for me was just coincides with what we've been talking about is know and understand yourself. I was going to mention that before about the fear of success, but it ties better into this one is know and understand yourself. And really, what do you want? Within that, what do you want? What does success look like for you? Success is one that, we talk about all the time. Everybody is striving for success. If you're not striving for success, you're lying to yourself or you're just a couch potato. Let's just be honest. Let's call it like it is. I'm striving for success. I'll say it. But now to label that and say what it is, say what I actually want, what kind of success do I want, and what does that help me achieve? That's a lot harder. That takes some time. That takes some mental energy and some contemplation to actually figure out and put that down on paper. But what is it do you want? And it's hard to really fully understand yourself and what you're trying to do unless you know what you want. And then kind of on that same note is know and understand what skills you actually have so you can fully utilize those skills. So you can push them to your fullest extent. That's kind of principle number one there is know and understand yourself. Now, number two is going to be just deal with today. Deal with today. Going back to the sell-by tactics, one thing that they talk about within sell-by marketing, we're not trying to predict what the future is going to be. We are just dealing with today. We are just trying to take what we have today and understand it and control what we can. So we're not trying to look at the markets. And right after I went to the school, I was talking with a guy and he's like, well, what did he say? Did they say anything about the markets, which direction they're going to go? And I said, no, that's the whole point of this is we're not trying to worry about something that's out of our control. And so deal with today. And this is just a core principle for everything. Deal with today. Deal with what's at hand. We can't focus on tomorrow if tomorrow is in the future, and we don't want to focus on the past too much. We don't want to dwell on that. So just deal with today, deal with whatever's at hand. And that just allows us to stay present and in the moment. And so that is one thing that can be a really good core principle to really take home is just deal with today and control what we can. And then on the same lines of control, know your cost. Know your cost. That's just a principle with everything. Know your cost within business, within everything we're trying to do. I think of cost, and cost might even be just even related to our personal side as well. Not necessarily even personal expenses. I'm talking like, okay, what's your cost of time? Where you're spending your time? Is it costing you to spend your time in the business more or with family more? Or what does that actually look like? So cost can be a multitude of meanings there. So, but know your cost, including profit. And I'm not necessarily saying profit as a cost, but making sure we're including our profit within our cost production. And that goes back to a book that I read a while back about Profit First. Mike Michalowicz, I believe is his name, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Go look it up. Good book there. But talking about profit first and the fact that we're taking the profit first, because at the end of the day, profit is going to be the blood life of our business. I'm going to get to that in a second, but knowing your cost and including your profiting inside of that allows us to make sure we don't forget about it. Because let's face it, in agriculture and farming, a lot of times we just think, well, whatever's left over, that's what our take home is. Hopefully we make a profit. We're doing our best to cover our costs. And if we make a profit 3 out of 10 years, well, by golly, I guess that's good enough to keep doing this for generations. I mean, no, I guess at the end of the day, that's where it kind of comes back to that paradigm is shifting that paradigm so that way profit is not what's left over at the end of the day. Profit is included within your cost. So that way we can cover that. So that way we do have profit at the end of the day. And back to the core principle of Profit First, that book that I just mentioned before, is if we take our profit first and then our revenue has to cover the rest of the expenses, typically in a typical operation, we're going to say, well, we've got too many expenses. We can't take this much profit. Well, maybe that's a red flag. Maybe we got to do something else there. Maybe we got to adjust our expenses. Maybe we got to increase our revenue. Maybe we got to do something else there. But either way, if there's not enough profit left over, we need to make a change. We need to do something different. That's an understatement. That's definitely underrated when it comes to farming and even ranching, right? There's just so much of that we never even consider taking the profit first. We consider profit, well, wishful thinking, right? If we wish for a profit but expect to lose money 3 out of 10 years, what do you think is going to actually happen? And so to keep moving here on profit, because profit is one thing that they talked a lot about in the school. But profit is, like I just mentioned before, the lifeblood of the operation. Kind of goes back to cash flow. I've said that a lot of times, especially on calls with clients or prospects, is when we talk about cash flow and how we try to manage cash flow, it's the lifeblood of the operation. So to survive and thrive, we must generate a positive cash flow and profit. And so here's one of the big take homes. If you're going to remember a few phrases out of this entire episode, this is one of them. So turn the earbuds up, turn your volume up if you're going to do that. This is one of the big take homes. Heard it many times before, but we need to remember this. We need to remember this. Maybe staple it somewhere, tattoo it on your arm, if you will, put it on the bulletin board in the main office. Revenue feeds the ego, profits feed the family. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Revenue feeds the ego, profits feed the family. So are you trying to feed your ego? Or are you trying to feed the family? And the results that you get are based off the paradigms that you currently have. And I say that because a lot of our paradigms within production, agriculture, in farming and ranching, row crops and cattle, as we focus on those, is mostly tied to production. I got 93 bushels per acre of wheat this year. I got 200 bushels per acre of corn. I raised a calf that had a 4.0 daily gain. I sold my heaviest weaning weights on these calves this year. And we're talking about revenue. We never talk about profits, and profits feed the family. And last I checked, I would much rather feed my family than feed my ego. Revenue feeds the ego, and profit feeds the family. So think about what you're ultimately trying to accomplish and where you're spending your time. Well, I shouldn't even say spending your time, but just even the paradigm that you have that's getting the results that you currently have. And so that's a big one there, kind of a big hitter there. Probably even should have left that at the end just to kind of end it off with that. A couple additional little thoughts here that they talked about is they talked about inventory management. And I thought this was really interesting because at the end of the day, when we're in a business, whether it be production, agriculture, retail, service-based business, whatever it is, we're just trying to manage inventory. We're trying to manage the assets that we have and do our best to manage them efficiently, right? So managing inventory. Within the school, they kind of created, and probably a lot of other people have talked about as well, more on the livestock side, but they call it an inventory pyramid. They start off with a triangle, but it's more of a pyramid. So at the bottom of the pyramid, kind of the base is people. We can't do any of this without people, ourselves included. So people is kind of the base. So we need to have people. And then we need to have feed and money. Okay. You can't have cattle unless you have feed or money. That's just face it. We need those things, feed and money. So that's kind of the next second level there, second tier. And then cattle's the top one. Cattle's at the top. The whole point of this is if you have feed but no money, well, you can't have cattle, right? So you can't have them at the top. If you have money but no feed, you still can't have cattle. So cattle are at the top, but at the very top of that pyramid, we have time. Time. You can't do any of these things without time. So we need to make sure that we have the time to do everything to manage this inventory pyramid and do it justice. So that was a big thing that they really talked about was kind of inventory pyramid and managing your inventory. In this case, I just mentioned it for cattle, but it could be the same thing for row crops and managing the inventory that we have. It could be the same for retail, any business. We are in the business of managing inventory. They also talked a lot about money and kind of even the mindset around money and money traits. Okay, so money goes where it is invited and stays where it is welcome. Money also is the reward for helping others. And I wanted to double click on that one. Money is the reward for helping others. When I heard that, what I really thought back to was, if you've ever heard of Zig Ziglar, he was a motivational speaker, did a lot on goal setting and self-talk. So coincides with everything we're talking about here, right? And so Zig Ziglar had a phrase that you can get everything that you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. And I've remembered that. That's really stuck with me for a long time. So money is the reward for helping others. And value is basically, we're just trading money for value. Okay, so if we can provide enough value to others, we will ultimately be rewarded. And that's kind of a core principle that I try my best to adapt as well. So the last one here, before we get to kind of rounding this out, we did a lot of math within the school. So sell by marketing involves the relationships of different classes of livestock, understanding the value of gain between different weight classes, understanding what their cost of gain is, and factoring all this stuff in. They've got what they call the cattle square, building your barn card, and just a lot of math. So literally, when you go to the school, it says bring your own calculator. Even if it's calculator on your phone, you got to bring your own calculator. We're doing a lot of math, which it's all fairly basic, some kind of different algebraic equations. So not terrible, but if it's something you've never done before, it's probably not the easiest. And so when we get into it and we're trying to figure out these math problems, trying to do our best to actually calculate them right, there's times where it wasn't the easiest, and so we maybe didn't get it figured out right away, or maybe there was somebody that was kind of struggling with it. And a lot of times when you're in that group setting, sitting at a table with others around you, you're doing best to figure it out and focus. But I personally get distracted easy, or like it's hard for my mind to fully grasp what we're trying to learn. that's pretty common for me. And so maybe we get to this point where it's just really hard to figure it out. And it's pretty easy for us to go, I'll figure it out later, or I'm not going to do this, or I can't get it, right? And so I had a guy next to me, and I was able to kind of figure out some of this for the most part. And he was just kind of struggling with one of these equations. I leaned over to him. I was like, so did you figure it out yet? And after he worked on it, he was just focusing on it. He wasn't giving up. I said, so did you figure it out yet? And he said, no, but I'm going to. And that stuck with me, folks, because that is ultimately the mindset that we need to have as problem solvers, as business owners, as parents, even. The mindset of, no, I haven't figured it out, acknowledging the fact that I'm not lying to myself. I haven't figured this out. I haven't figured out life or business, but I'm going to, or I'm going to solve this problem. The problems that come our way, or the new levels and the new devils that come our way. Have you figured out the new devil yet? Have you figured out the new challenge? No, but I'm going to. That mindset of I'm going to is the most resilient mindset that is ultimately going to help flip that paradigm and get you the results that you want. So as we get to rounding this out, I'm going to go back to that beginning phrase. Unless you change your mind, you won't change your results. That goes hand in hand with what we just talked about. No, but I'm going to. What action can we actually take away from this? What action can you take away from what we've talked about here? Okay, so what is your current paradigm? I'm going to go back to that one. I think we're going to start with that one. Okay, so what is your current paradigm? And is it getting you the results that you want? And if it's not, how can we change that? What can you do? What's one simple thing? Start simple. Don't try to conquer the world in the first day, the first week. Start simple. What's one simple change we can do? Talking to ourselves differently. Actually hoping for the positive outcome and expecting the positive outcome. All right, what's one thing we can do or change to get the results that we're actually striving for? And so the last phrase is, I want to go back to that really powerful one, is revenue feeds the ego, profits feed the family. We cannot forget about that one. All right, if you want to learn more about Doug Ferguson, Mr. Cattlemaster as he calls himself, he does a lot of good things on social media. Facebook, TikTok, I believe, is the two that he's on. He's got a really good website. He's got some upcoming schools in November and December, I believe. So look up his schools on his website. He also did a lot of the Mr. Cattlemaster name. It came from his Intel blog on Farm Progress. So look that up as well. He's got a lot of good blogs. He's on YouTube as well. So posting a lot about this stuff. And so go look him up. Go talk to him. He's a really good guy that shares a lot of knowledge that he's learned over the years. So a lot of beneficial information from there. And if you want to hit me up as well, I can share my thoughts on the school if you've maybe thought about a school like this. But the big thing also I want to kind of end this on, I went to this school with the thought process of just continuing to learn, maybe seeing if this is a strategy that we can implement within our own operation, but then also that just continuously learning mindset. I called it continuing education because that's basically what it was, is we are continuing our education, continuing to learn and grow and do new things. That's why I was really glad that they spent a lot of time on the mindset side, because that's extremely crucial. So I hope that you took something away from this week's episode. I hope there was some value, something that was actually usable for you to take and implement within your own operation, within your own mindset, within your own paradigm. That's all I got for this week's episode, folks. We'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram @GarrettRuskamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.